I would like to share my paper to facilitate your understanding. May I? Do you see it? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So, I try to show some relevant aspects deriving from the social, from the model of eccentricity. And so my topics are really close to the previous one. So in the first part of my presentation, I recall the structural relationship between eccentricity and sociality. In the second part, I show why eccentricity requires us to actually consider society as a theater. Social theatricality is based on the concept of a curriculum from which derives a phenomenology of symbolic forms with an aesthesiological basis and an ethics of distance. In background of the social theater, there is always the body in its exposure to violence and death. The anthropological model of eccentricity. Plessner attended Husserl's lectures in Göttingen for a while and planned to do a doctoral thesis with him. The project did not come to fruition, but the phenomenological imprinting remained. For Plessner, phenomenology is a tool for reading the manifold manifestation of experience without relegating them to a theoretical box and without immediately reducing them to a data for a scientific explanation. No science grasps the phenomenhafte am Phänomen. With phenomenology, philosophy, instead of being a writing books about books, finally becomes an Arbeit unter offenem Horizont, ein im freien Philosophieren. Following a tradition that he traced back to Goethe and Herder, the phenomenal form reveals the nature of something in an interplay between observant and observed, because, as Dilthey taught, it is about life understanding life. Phenomenology must therefore have an hermeneutic component, which considers the semiotic and communicative context of observation. The freedom of the phenomenological gaze should be guided not through the transcendental reduction of subjectivity, but through an interpretative keys that derive from culture understood as a system of symbolic forms rooted in physical experience. For this reason, Plessner proposes an aesthesiology of culture, that is a study of the structural relationship between matter and symbolic form, which extends as far as the biological roots. The specificity of a symbolic form is understood on the basis of the limits of translatability into other symbolic forms. How far are music, painting, geometry, and language mutually translatable? This is the main question of aesthesiology. The limits are set by the constitutive connection between certain symbolization and certain feature and affordances of the acoustic, tactile, visual, and etc. So these affordances of the sensible material. Living matter can also be understood on the basis of the concept of limits by means of a phenomenology of the limits that characterize physical entities. Plessner establishes that a body is living not simply when it ends up on its own borders, but when it establishes a relationship with them. When it takes a position, it arranges itself towards its own physical border, which in turn it becomes a selective threshold between inside and outside. The relationship of a body to its boundaries is called positionality. A living body is placed in its boundaries, which thus represent the periphery of a virtual sense. Positionality becomes more and more pronounced as we move from the open plant from the closed animal form, where centralization is also physically located in the brain. The process characteristics of biology, nourishment, transformation, development, and so on, take on the aspect of a biography, an individual drama. So you can visualize the model of different limits in the general sense on the left side and for living bodies. So the main difference is that for living beings, the boundary belongs to the body. It's not just a virtual separation between two bodies. So the human eccentric form is an extreme complication of the closed centralized form. The psychophysical center from which the animal lives is now placed in front of the individual as a bodily image, as an external representation of itself, as the reflexive power to become an object of itself and to look at itself through the eyes of others. This reiterable splitting of the individual unity is characterized as eccentricity. One's physical center is both the point of convergence and the point of flight of one's identity. Ich bin aber, ich habe mich nicht. Man is thus caught between the delimited egocentric environment of the animal and an unlimited allocentric world. Eccentric positionality is transversal to several centers: inner world, outer world, and common world. In fact, the world is the intertwining of the three centers. The distance of self from itself forms an inner field which is generated in opposition to an outer field. These two fields still have a circumscribed and environmental character, whereas the common field is open and indeterminate, neither internal nor external. It's constituted through positional overturning, seeing oneself from the outside as one of many. The midwelt is a third sphere, which is not the dialectical synthesis of the others, but the scene where everyone is another and can be replaced and substituted. I am a face, a name, a worker, a lover, and so on. We've already heard about it. Second, the foundations of social sociology. Sociality is inscribed in the eccentric life. My ego is a character that moves on a mental and social scene. Character and scene are not mere metaphors, since the eccentric identity is itself metaphorical. It's by definition displays from a given center. On the other hand, it's precisely this instability that prompts the search for an artificial center of gravity, which is realized in public roles and institutions, externally well recognizable and artificially ruled. That theatricality is the very reality of eccentric life can be seen by considering the concept of Verkörperung. It summarizes Plesner's theological foundation of symbolic forms. This foundation shows the transcendental link between nature and culture. At the same time, it shows the transcendental link between subject and the social symbolic form. Here I will deal with this second link, sketching a kind of social sociology. As mentioned above, sociology is a philosophy of the senses that analyzes the structural links between mind and body, spirit and matter. The term sociology has been used sporadically in positivist psychophysiology and by Russo in the Ideas. Plesner uses this unusual term to emphasize that sensitivity is considered neither in its biological nor in its aesthetic value, but to outline a kind of morphology of the sensible world. The basic idea is that the sensory and phenomenal qualities constitute original ontologies to which certain modes of thought, semiosis, and interpretation correspond. The symbolic form in which thought is manifest are not indifferent to the material signs in which the forms Sichtverkörpern are embodied. Thus, as far as the materials are phenomenically different, symbolic forms have mutual limits of translatability and reproducibility. On an anthropological level, Verkörperung consists in the fact that identity is formed through figuration that represent to us, to ourselves, and to others. The first figuration is our own body. We both coincide and do not coincide with it. I am my body, but at the same time, I have a body, like an external thing that I must learn to inhabit. In fact, it takes a long learning process before learning to walk and to govern movements. The balance remains precarious in any case, as we see in situation consciousness and or uncontrolled expression, laughter and crying. Faced with situations that present an infringement of the normal course of things, generate a mental and emotional short-circuit, one bursts out laughing or crying. The situation is out of control and our body also lets itself go into an uncontrolled reaction where we no longer control our own body. This is a common example of a gap between the self and the body, but a represented gap, which brings to visibility the momentary lack of unity. Bodily expressiveness, whether intentional or unintentional, is the most immediate moment of the self representing itself, as from within a bodily cover, when my face revealed to be a surface. The self is its body, but having a body means becoming a character. The individual places himself in his body, then in his name, then in the many roles he will play. He will dress, speak, behave according to certain patterns. His person is delineated in an increasingly abstract and anonymous figurative plot. In the midwelt, the I is confused with the we, you, they. He is one, known, and 100,000. This moment of decentralization is necessary. A certain amount of alienation is necessary to be oneself. Alienation, the indirect way, makes me somebody, and only then can I get in touch with myself. This is a short quotation that well summarizes the main point. Dass jeder es aber sich nicht hat, genauer gesagt nur im Umweg über andere und anders als jemand hat, gibt der menschlichen Existenz in Gruppen ihren institutionellen Charakter. Culture is a set of patterns of action and thoughts, like science, art, and language. Macro institutions such as the state, the administrative apparatus, the school, the church are also the result of Verkörperungen. Society, ethics, and politics must therefore be part of a philosophy of symbolic forms. Third, a sociology of the public sphere. To be a person means to be a character in front of a real or visual public. Society is the place where this theatrical dimension is explicit. It therefore provides a set of rules of behavior. Being in society means showing oneself to others. The phenomenal dimension takes on an essential value. To be is to be perceived. The public image is one of an aesthetic nature that is first of all perceptive and then linked to taste, judgment, symbols, and value. The public image is made up of sounds, colors, lines, flavors, and tactile sensations. This perceptive figuration convey direct and indirect messages. Appearances produce a mobile spectacle where everyone is both an actor and spectator. In the public space, everyone is their own image, which in reality is not really their own, because it is halfway between me and what others see of me. The public image is perceptibly constructed and therefore leaves impressions, leaves a trace that then follows its own autonomous path. Our public image is a kind of double, look-alike. that circulates through indirect traces, referred words, memories, evaluation. It strengthens or disperses itself in a network of references which follows its own communicative criteria. What we see and think becomes a formula, the part played by a character. Our public doubles reveal and hide us from ourselves. The public image is furthermore non-neutral, but always accompanied by judgment. It has a reputation, an esteem, a certain value. It's in public that we make good or bad impression, that we gain or lose respect, fame, and prestige. The performance as a climate, an atmosphere, contextual condition that influence actors and spectators' perception and judgment. This aesthetic component is often considered the opposite of ethics, precisely because it makes judgment superficial and transient, too closely linked to the moment and the state of mind. It's only accepted an aesthetic aspect of politics because politics, by definition, public and uses rhetorical tools, where rhetoric is everything that serves to persuade, stimulating above all emotion and feelings. The weakness of this critic is that it overlooks the aesthesiological matrix of culture, that all we do is shaped by symbols that have specific expressive, communicative, and performative properties. Public space is the specific social aspect of symbolic forms, the moment in which they strengthen or weaken the social bond. Social aspect, public space is a specific social aspect of symbolic forms. Social aesthesiology confirms the formative and performative power of appearances. They do not add to substance and content, they shape them, give them a recognizable and accessible form. Without form, substance is not even perceived. The culture of society belongs to all ages. However, in the modern centuries, it has increased and modified its functions in parallel with the emergence of a worldwide anonymous public space. Public opinion, mass media, mass phenomena, global exchanges, producing a world society that observes and represents only itself, no longer having external horizons. Especially with the development of technological media, the world society has exalted theatricalization to the extreme, which tends to become self-referential and to lose its cultural function, that of personal formation and social mediation. This calls for reflection. Fourth, the community of the limits. Ethics is often associated with interiority, intention, or with universal norm. But behavior takes place in society, so there is always a public and political moment for ethics. It must at least find a compromise with the sphere of appearances, with an aesthetic moment of taste, impressions, and game of make-believe. It's no coincidence that at the beginning of the secular age, a new ethic of public virtues developed based on the self-domination body and mind. The public virtues were those that favor society, good manners, conversation, prudence, cultural competence, extending to the custom and tradition of distant peoples. The virtuous man was called a man of word because he knew how to move in the most diverse contexts. He knew how to and when to apply his value and knowledge in a plural reality without absolute references. In a plural reality, appearances are the main point of contact between people. Virtue cannot only be an inner value, but must be a tool for being with others. The others are everyone. The public sphere is everybody's and nobody's, so its specific qualities are impersonality, contingency, indeterminacy. These qualities have the advantage of unlimited sociality, open to the most diverse encounters, and it has the disadvantage of unpredictability and risk. Each is exposed to the other in a positive and negative sense of exchange, but also of attack. global world is a permanent universal exposition. It's on the basis of these elements that Plessner has developed an ethic for the eccentric man, an ethic of distance. Sketching such an ethics, he revived the above-mentioned tradition of morality centered on self-government and the art of appearances. The ethics of distance should meet the challenges of the capitalist world society. On the one hand, the open and pluralistic society reflects the fullest extent possible the Mitwelt as an essential component of eccentric man. On the other hand, this society must compensate for its depersonalizing potential. On one hand, the open society is the social model best suited to the dialectal of eccentricity, which generates the most diverse forms of life. As a creativity nourished by its own existential restlessness and is at ease in a society not bound by rigid hierarchies. On the other hand, there is a limit to social openness, to the anonymous dimension of the public sphere. Without compensation, openness produces pure indifference or uncontrollable reaction of flight or attack. An ethos of distance seeks the balance between alienation in a character and loss of identity, between a ritual play of social mask and pure fiction. It's an ethics of the limit understood as a mobile figuration of oneself and as a search for measure. We can qualify it as an ethics of habitus, of habit, of the public virtues, where the norm of action derives from the choice of kind of person I want to be. If I choose to give ethical meaning to my actions, I must develop personal virtues with public recognizability and evaluability based on external performances and conducts. The ethos of distance reintroduces the personal aspect into the anonymous and impersonal public space. It makes this space a theater of regulated actions where the personal value of relationships is rediscovered, even if at a distance, through the filter of convenience, good manners, and the art of being together. The text where Plessner outlines the ethics of distance is entitled Die Grenzen der Gemeinschaft. The genitive is in the title is to be understood as a subjective and objective genitive. In an objective sense, the limit indicates the inadequacy of both the fusion community based on familiarity and the universalistic community based on objective reason. Universalist community and familial community do not take into account the ambiguity of the eccentric man resulting from his indeterminacy. This ambiguity is instead respected if we understand the genitive in a subjective sense. The community of limits, that is a community of strangers negotiating the boundaries of their differences in the light of the absolute risk of the absence of limit, that is violence and death. The regulative value of limit lies in the recognition of contingency of life and the conflictual character of living together. This recognition gives a form of measure to the struggle for recognition that actually operates in the public sphere. If one does not want to neutralize the conflict through the fusionist community, which reads the limits as a closure, or through the rationalist community, which reads the limits as a universal juridical norm, then remains the path of an ethics of distance. It reads the limit as self-control that is realized in social virtues, that is in a series of cognitive, for example, epistemic reliability, intellectual honesty, truthfulness, and behavioral courtesy, tact, prudence, temperance. The exercise of these virtues produces a social theater where appearances have a mediating function. So maybe I skip some lines and I come to the conclusion. And the conclusion is about the concept of Entkörperung. We have seen that the concept of Verkörperung assigns to the metaphor of the theater fundamental task in carrying out a social phenomenology. It's fundamental because eccentricity consists in a splitting of the subject, oscillating between the elusive self and the stabilizing public mask. It's also fundamental because generally considered culture as a system of symbolic forms that makes up the concrete scene of our experience. In the symbolic forms, the world takes on the appearance of a mental and perceptive drama. Sociality is a properly public moment of this drama. Hence, theatricality is also fundamental for analyzing the ethical and social models that best suit the ambiguities of eccentricity without eliminating its creative power or releasing its destructive power. It's worth remembering in conclusion that alongside the Verkörperung, there is an Entkörperung, disembodiment. The term serves as a reminder of the relationship between eccentricity and transcendence, the absence of an absolute center of reference, an absence that is covered but not eliminated in the social game, is compensated for with transcendent ideas. This explains the persistence of metaphysical and religious thought and imagination even after the death of God. Metaphysics and religion are always also a way of processing death and precariousness through the idea of totality, salvation, and absolute. They have a regulative function to make sense of experience, and they have utopian features because they elaborate something that is not really there, the backdrop of the theater, the final meaning of the drama. On the ethical level, the Entkörperung gives a symbolic role to the loss of the body, to the loss of all boundaries. This loss symbolizes, by contrast, the value of one's own limits and the meaning of the limitation imposed by ethics. The ethics of distance is based on the recognition of physical and mental fragility. It regulates relations with others even as it evokes mutual violence and common mortal destiny. Behind the mask are naked bodies. It can be assumed that one of the effects of the technological and mass society of spectacle is precisely its loss of limits. Closed communities and rationalistic communities overlap, generating a dangerous hybrid. Countless closed but abstract and indifferent communities appear on the scene, reactive communities lacking an authentic formative culture. In the universal scene, the regulatory codes of distance are cancelled and replaced by a hallucinatory and anesthetic immediacy. Social exhibition becomes an end in itself. Verkörperung is transformed into Entkörperung with no limiting or warning function. Aggression is unleashed without filters. Even violence and death become a spectacle without symbolic value. The point is not to eliminate the spectacle, but to give it back a theatrical value with all the aesthetic wisdom and ethical rigor that it demands. Pirandello wrote 6 characters in search of an author. So we should rediscover the order of the characters, or at least the value of his research. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your speech. So now we have time. We have about 5 to 6 minutes for questions. So questions are most welcome. Yes, Yaroslava?
So thank you for your presentation. I was very glad to hear again about Plessner and the very clear and structured way how he analyzed this problematic. So thank you very much for that. I would like to ask you maybe the similar question you asked me. Were other ways how to go out of the situation we live in, for example, contemporary world, where relations and the public sphere has a lot of deficient modes, a lot of deficient versions how we are together. So if we can find in Plessner some way how to go out of this situation. And the other question would be whether we can somehow okay, I will ask you maybe afterward this question, because so this will be my question now.
So your question is whether Plessner's ethics or philosophy can help to manage our spectacle society, isn't it?
Yes.
I rightly understood.
Yes.
So I find it interesting, Plessner's position, because he thematize, he deal with this idea of theater, no? As you know. And of course, our society is the spectacle society. So in a way, it will be maybe fruitful to not to simply to refuse the spectacle society, so the society of appearances. On the contrary, we have to understand this is rooted in our being. I mean, theatricality. This idea of being theatral in our essence. So we have to show ourselves, to reveal ourselves in this social game. And so from this point of view, I find still now in Plessner's philosophy some hints, some fruitful points of reference, even to face these world societies, this self-observing society. So the point is when you lose the sense of the spectacle, so to speak. So I mean, and the sense and the rules. So how to move yourself, how to relate to the others. This is the point. It's not the spectacle in itself, but how far we conscious are of the rules of the game, so to speak. So, for example, the ethic, so the culture of good manners, it's not simply courtesy, but the idea I'm playing a role. So I'm aware of the role, and which is fragile, with as a strategic feature. If I don't be aware of the rules of the play, it just remains the play, an empty play, so to speak. And so this is then the dangerous side of spectacle society. So people just ignore that to show itself, it will be a play. They think to be to reveal himself and to be honest and sincere and direct. And so I don't know if you get my point. So it's problem. We have lost the scene of the play. So this is the point. We cannot avoid to the theatrical aspect of our society. The point is how to give back the sense of rules, of a ruled play. So even on social, on personal level. So I'm showing now to you, but I know half of what I do is a ruled play. but I'm aware of it, but most people are not aware of it anymore. So, and this is a dangerous point.